I've been coming to the Riverside Library every Thursday evening for 3 years now. Always at 7:30, always heading straight for the poetry section in the back corner where the light is softer and the chairs are worn in just the right way. I'm a creature of habit, I guess. My therapist says I find comfort in routines, in the predictability of knowing exactly what comes next. But that Thursday in October, everything I thought I knew about my quiet, ordered life got turned completely upside down by a small piece of paper tucked inside a book of Pablo Neruda poems. My name is Ethan, and I'm 28 years old. I work as a graphic designer from home, which means most of my human interaction happens through screens and email threads. The library became my lifeline about 6 months after I moved to this city, when the loneliness of my apartment started feeling less like solitude and more like suffocation. I'd tell myself I was going for the books, for the atmosphere, for the change of scenery. But really, if I'm being honest, I was going to see him. Cassian. Even his name sounds like it belongs in one of the novels lining those shelves. He's the evening librarian, the one who works the late shift from 5 until closing at 9. I learned his name from his badge the first week, though it took me another month to actually speak to him beyond mumbled thank yous when he'd check out my books. He's maybe 32 or 33, with dark hair that's always slightly disheveled, like he's been running his fingers through it while reading. He wears these thin-framed glasses that he pushes up his nose when he's concentrating, and he has this habit of biting his lower lip when he's thinking about where to shelve a returned book. I know these things because I've spent 3 years watching him. Not in a creepy way, I hope. Just in the way you notice someone when they become part of the landscape of your life, when their presence starts to feel necessary somehow. He'd smile at me sometimes, these small, soft smiles that made my chest feel tight. We'd exchange a few words about books, about the weather, about nothing important. I'd rehearse conversations in my head on the drive over, clever things to say about literature or obscure poetry, references that might impress him. But when I'd actually stand in front of that circulation desk, my carefully planned words would evaporate, and I'd just hand over my books in silence. That October Thursday started like all the others. I'd finished my work around 6, eaten a quick dinner of leftover pasta, and driven the 15 minutes to the library. The parking lot was nearly empty, just a few cars scattered under the orange glow of the streetlights. Inside, the library had that hushed quality I loved, the sound of pages turning and the soft click of keyboards creating a kind of symphony of quiet industry. Cassian was at the desk when I walked in, helping an elderly woman find a large print mystery novel. He glanced up as I passed, and our eyes met for just a second. He smiled, and I felt that familiar flutter in my stomach, that mixture of hope and fear that had become so familiar I barely noticed it anymore. I smiled back and headed straight for my usual spot. The poetry section was empty, as it usually was. Not many people come to libraries for poetry anymore, Cassian had told me once. It's all thrillers and romance novels and self-help books. But you're different. He'd said it casually, while shelving returns near where I was browsing, but I'd replayed those words in my mind for weeks afterward. You're different. I wanted to believe there was meaning there, hidden beneath the surface of a simple observation. I was looking for something new that night, running my fingers along the spines, reading titles in the dim light. I'd been working my way through the classics, Whitman and Dickinson and Frost, and lately I'd been drawn to the more modern voices, the ones that wrote about desire and longing in ways that felt raw and honest. My fingers stopped on a slim volume I hadn't noticed before. 20 Love Poems and a Song of Despair by Pablo Neruda. The spine was cracked with use, the pages yellowed with age. I pulled it from the shelf and opened it randomly. That's when the note fell out. A small piece of paper, folded once, drifting down to land on my worn sneaker. I bent to pick it up, my heart already starting to race, though I didn't yet know why. The paper was cream-colored, thick, the kind you'd use for something important. I unfolded it with trembling fingers. The handwriting was neat, precise, written in blue ink. It said, "I've watched you choose your books for 3 years now. You always pick the lonely poets, the ones who wrote about longing. I wonder if you're looking for words to describe something you feel, or if you're just trying to feel less alone in feeling it. Either way, I want you to know that I see you, and I've been lonely too. If you want to talk about more than just books, I'll be in the staff room during my break at 8:15 tonight. The door will be unlocked. Cassian. I read it 3 times, then 4, then 5. My hands were shaking. My mind was racing through every interaction we'd ever had, searching for signs I'd missed, for hints that he'd been paying attention the same way I had. I checked my phone. It was 7:52. 23 minutes until 8:15. 23 minutes to decide if I was brave enough to walk through that staff room door. I sat down hard in one of the reading chairs, the book still open in my lap, the note clutched in my hand. My therapist's voice echoed in my head, all those sessions where we'd talked about my fear of vulnerability, my tendency to keep people at arm's length, to protect myself from rejection by never putting myself out there in the first place. You're so afraid of being hurt that you're choosing to be lonely instead, she'd said last month. At some point, Ethan, you have to decide if the possibility of connection is worth the risk of pain. I looked down at Neruda's words on the page in front of me. I want to do with you what spring does with the cherry trees. My eyes stung. How many times had I sat in this corner reading about love and desire and connection, all while keeping myself carefully separate from the possibility of actually experiencing those things? How many times had I driven home from this library feeling that ache of missed opportunity, of words unsaid? The minutes ticked by. 8 o'clock. 8:05. I stood up, sat back down, stood up again. An elderly man browsing the history section glanced at me with concern. I probably looked unhinged, pacing back and forth in the poetry section, muttering to myself. I thought about leaving, about slipping the book back on the shelf, and walking out to my car and driving home and pretending this had never happened. I thought about all the ways this could go wrong. What if it was a joke? What if I misread everything? What if I walked into that staff room and he looked at me with pity or confusion or worse, disgust? But then I thought about the alternative. Going home to my empty apartment, lying in bed replaying this moment, wondering what if. Spending the next 3 years or the next 30 choosing safety over possibility. Choosing loneliness over risk. At 8:13, I walked to the circulation desk. Cassian was checking in returns, scanning barcodes with mechanical efficiency. He looked up when I approached and something flickered across his face. Recognition, maybe. Hope? Possibly. Fear? Definitely. I held up the book, the note still tucked inside. I'd like to check this out, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. He took the book from my hands, and our fingers brushed. That small contact sent electricity up my arm. He opened the book to scan the barcode, and the note fell onto the desk between us. We both looked at it. Then he looked at me, really looked at me, and I saw everything I'd been feeling reflected back in his eyes. My break is in 2 minutes, he said quietly. The staff room is through that door behind the reference desk. I'll meet you there. I nodded, not trusting my voice. He scanned my library card, handed me the book, and our eyes held for a moment longer. Then I turned and walked toward the reference desk on legs that felt like they might give out at any moment. The staff room was small, with a round table, a few mismatched chairs, a mini fridge humming in the corner, and a coffee maker with a half-full pot that smelled burnt. There was a bulletin board covered in work schedules and safety notices, and a small window that looked out onto the parking lot. I stood in the middle of the room, clutching the book of Neruda poems, trying to remember how to breathe. The door opened, and Cassian stepped inside. He closed it behind him, not all the way, just enough to give us privacy. We stood there looking at each other, and I realized I had no idea what to say. All those rehearsed conversations, all those clever observations, and my mind was completely blank. "You came," he said finally, and there was such relief in his voice that something in my chest loosened. "I almost didn't," I admitted. "I'm not usually very brave." He smiled, that soft smile I'd been memorizing for 3 years. "Neither am I. It took me 6 months to write that note. I've been slipping it into books I thought you'd choose, then taking it back out at the end of my shift. Tonight I decided to just leave it there, to let fate decide." "How did you know I'd picked that book?" "You've been working your way through the poetry section alphabetically by author. You finished with Malay last week. Neruda was next. He pushed his glasses up his nose, that familiar gesture. I told you I've been paying attention. My heart was hammering so hard I was sure he could hear it. Why? I asked. Why me? He took a step closer, and I could smell his cologne, something woody and warm. Because you look at books the way I wish someone would look at me, like they matter, like they're full of possibilities, like they might contain the answer to something important. He paused, swallowed hard. And because every Thursday at 7:30 for 3 years, you've been the best part of my day. I felt tears prickling at my eyes. I thought I was invisible, I whispered. I thought I was just another patron, just another face. Ethan, the way he said my name made my knees weak. You've never been invisible to me. Not for a single day. The space between us felt charged, electric. I could feel the pull of him, the gravity of this moment. 3 years of longing, of missed connections, of carefully maintained distance, and suddenly there was nothing between us but a few feet of air and the question of who would be brave enough to cross it. I stepped forward. So did he. And then his hand was reaching for mine, his fingers intertwining with my fingers, and the touch was everything I'd imagined and nothing like I'd imagined, both familiar and completely new. His hand was warm, slightly calloused, real. I don't know how to do this, I said, my voice shaking. I'm not good at letting people in. I know, he said gently. I've watched you keep yourself apart. I've seen you build walls with silence. But Ethan, I'm not asking you to tear them all down at once. I'm just asking if maybe you'd let me stand on the other side and we could talk through them for a while. Until you're ready. And that's when I started crying. Really crying. Because no one had ever seen me that clearly before. No one had ever offered me that kind of patience, that kind of understanding. He pulled me into his arms, and I let myself fold into his embrace and press my face against his shoulder and just feel everything I'd been holding back for so long. I'm sorry, I mumbled into his shirt. This is so embarrassing. Don't be sorry. His hand moved to the back of my head, gentle, soothing. Do you know how long I've wanted to hold you like this? How many times I've imagined what it would feel like? We stood like that for a long time, just holding each other in that small staff room while the library hummed with quiet activity beyond the door. Eventually, I pulled back enough to look at him, and he reached up to wipe the tears from my cheeks with his thumbs, his touch so tender it made me want to cry all over again. Can we start slow? I asked. Can we just talk? Maybe get coffee sometime. Let me get used to this. We can go as slow as you need, he promised. We've already waited 3 years. I'm not going anywhere. We talked for the rest of his break, sitting at that small table, our hands still clasped together on the surface between us. He told me about how he'd noticed me that first week, how he'd been immediately drawn to the quiet intensity with which I browsed the shelves. I told him about my loneliness, about how the library had become my refuge, about how seeing him had become the anchor of my week. We talked about our favorite books and our childhoods and our fears and our hopes, and it felt like the most natural thing in the world. When his break ended, he had to go back to the desk, but he walked me out to my car, and before I got in, he kissed my cheek, just a soft press of his lips against my skin that made my whole body light up. Thursday, he said. Same time? I'll be here, I promised. I drove home with the windows down, cold October air rushing through the car, Neruda's book of poems on the passenger seat beside me. When I got to my apartment, I made tea and curled up on the couch and opened the book to the first poem. I want to do with you what spring does with the cherry trees. I understood it now, that longing, that desire to transform and be transformed. I was terrified, but I was also, for the first time in a very long time, hopeful. That was 3 months ago. Cassian and I have been together ever since, taking it slow like I needed, building something real and solid and true. He's patient with my fears, gentle with my walls, and every day I find myself opening up a little more, trusting a little deeper. We still meet at the library every Thursday, but now we leave together, and he comes to my apartment, and we cook dinner and talk about books, and slowly, carefully, I'm learning what it means to let someone in. I still can't quite believe that he noticed me, that he saw me when I felt invisible, that he was brave enough to leave that note. Sometimes I take it out and read it again, that small piece of cream-colored paper that changed everything. I've watched you choose your books for 3 years now. I keep it in my wallet now, a reminder that sometimes the love stories we read about aren't just fantasies. Sometimes they're possibilities, waiting for us to be brave enough to reach for them. Last week, Cassian told me he loves me. We were in my apartment and rain was falling outside, and we were reading on the couch with my head in his lap. He was running his fingers through my hair, and he just said it, simple and true. I love you, Ethan, and I said it back, because I do. I love him. I love the way he sees me, the way he's patient with my healing, the way he makes me feel like I'm enough exactly as I am. I don't know what comes next. I'm still learning how to be in a relationship, how to share my space and my time and my heart. But I'm learning, and he's teaching me, and every day it gets a little easier to believe that I deserve this, that we both do. The lonely poets I used to read, they wrote about longing because they understood it. But now I'm learning about something else, something they wrote about too, but that I never quite believed in. I'm learning about love that's real and present and possible. And it's better than any book I've ever read. Total_char_count 16,847.